In recent years, climate change has become an immediate threat to all humanity. Never before have countries had to strain this hard to cope with such fierce natural disasters. From multiple waves of extreme heat and prolonged droughts to unusual floods, everything is contributing to the spread of disease and seriously affecting public health. Are we gradually inching toward the brink of extinction? And can sleek technological solutions actually save us from crisis? Perhaps the phrases green living or clean energy are no longer unfamiliar to you. From harnessing solar power and capturing wind to electric vehicles gradually replacing traditional internal combustion engines, these efforts reflect a serious and hopeful shift by humankind. On top of that, if you remember, this year's national graduation exam unexpectedly mentioned a concept that left many students confused and stunned. Greenwashing. It sounds green, but it hides a lot of dark corners, especially as more and more large corporations exploit eco-friendly imagery to burnish their reputations through greenwashing tactics that make them look far more environmentally friendly than they actually are. So, with this video, we want not only to clarify that confusing exam term, but also to offer another perspective on the globally discussed picture called clean energy at this moment. If you're ready to lift that curtain, let's start today's video. The first time people meaningfully expressed concern about climate change was in 1958 through the episode The Unchained Goddess in a TV science series called The Bell System Science Series. The film became an important milestone in both cinema and environmental history for spotlighting issues like polar ice melt, consequences of overexploiting natural resources and using fossil fuels during industrial development. You could say, Unchained Goddess awakened people around the world, and Jeff Gibbs was one of them. Calling himself a pioneer environmental activist of his generation, at just 9 years old, Jeff sabotaged a bulldozer by pouring sand in its gas tank after watching it flatten the forest behind his house. A few years later, he began working with tree advocacy groups and moved to the northern wilderness of Michigan. Throughout his time as an environmental activist, Jeff wrote articles for the Mother Earth News, traveled the country, and met with countless organizations across campaigns to defend the environment. For Jeff, the Unchained Goddess mirrored an ugly reality people chose to ignore and forget. Pollution levels around the world were constantly at red alert. Haze smothered sunlight, rivers stank, and cities were buried in garbage. Old, broken cars were even dumped into rivers as a cheap disposal method. People soon realized that if we kept extracting today's mineral resources, eventually crude oil, coal, and natural gas would run out. That's when they began looking for renewable energy, what we now call clean energy. Solar panels became a practical solution. Jeff himself installed them on his family's farm, limited his use of grid electricity, and heated his home by burning wood instead of using fossil fuels like gas. For Jeff, that was enough to run a life. But that quickly became a bigger question. Why are we still using fossil fuels? Why haven't we fully switched to green energy? And that's when Jeff uncovered the deceit lurking in this trillion-dollar industry. At a festival in Green Mountain, Vermont, an event touting 100% solar energy from panels lined along the stage, Jeff and his team spotted something odd backstage. Organizers were running a generator on biofuel in case rain knocked out the power. Exactly. This is solar's built-in weakness. Fundamentally, panels rely on the photovoltaic effect in semiconductors to generate electricity when sunlight hits them. So when it rains, or when there's no sun, there's no power. But this festival was huge. Could that biofuel generator really power the booths and keep the big stage outside running? The harsh answer? No. Off in the distance sat a mobile unit tied into the municipal grid. In other words, the organizers were acting against their own stated ideals, but had no other choice. That was the first time Jeff felt so disappointed. He told himself the next project would be better. In February 2009, less than a month after taking office, US President Barack Obama poured billions into renewables through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, ARRA. Green activists nationwide cheered. With $100 billion, they believed green energy would transform and produce breakthroughs. To boost effectiveness, Obama brought on high-profile ambassadors like analyst and attorney Van Jones, and former Vice President Al Gore, famous for An Inconvenient Truth, a documentary on climate change that won the 2007 Oscar. Gore had a huge effect, inspiring Richard Branson, co-founder of the Virgin Group, to invest in green tech. Branson pledged to funnel all future profits from Virgin Atlantic, estimated at $3 billion, into researching and developing environmentally friendly energy. Not to be left out, Vinod Khosla, often called a father of green tech investing, poured more than $1 billion into over 50 energy startups. Major banks like Goldman Sachs rushed in, financing wind farms and solar farms. Heavyweights opened their wallets to environmental organizations. For example, the Sierra Club, America's oldest and most influential green group, received $50 million. With a promise to replace coal, green tech, and clean energy became hot keywords on every forum. As a predictable result, a flood of eco-groups sprang up. Bill McKibben, author of The End of Nature, founded 350.org, aiming to ignite a global climate movement. General Motors, one of the world's largest automakers for over a century, launched new electric models. When the Chevy Volt was announced, GM reps promised the infrastructure, pricing, and policies were ready to make EVs accessible. With easy charging, GM proudly declared anyone could now help protect the environment. But where did the electricity for charging come from? The company reps fumbled. They said power came from the building and the city's supply. Then Jay Peterlich, representing the city's Water and Power Commission, was pushed to answer and, sweating bullets, admitted 95% of the grid's electricity came from coal. Still, there was no alternative, because wind and solar couldn't deliver the sustained electricity EVs would need. As noted, solar has that inherent flaw. It can't operate without sun. Wind is heavily weather dependent. Put simply, making transportation fully dependent on clean energy was nearly impossible. The problem is, to provide enough electricity for EVs, cities would have to ramp up output at thermal power plants. In other words, when you trace EVs back to the source, they don't really help reduce pollution by much. Take Lansing, Michigan. The city has a solar array the size of a football field, yet the electricity it supplies is tiny. First, those panels only hit about 8% efficiency, the city's water and power rep explained. That was the best they could manage. Only NASA-sized budgets could make the ultra-efficient, ultra-expensive panels. Initially, the city hoped the project would power about 50 households. But with a modest annual output of only around 64,000 kilowatts, it actually powered about 10 homes. To light the whole city with clean energy, they'd need about 36 square kilometers of solar panels, a number that's absurd and unworkable. So the dream of lighting a city with clean energy shrank down to a far more modest reality. What about wind farms? Jeff visited sprawling fields in Michigan dotted with giant turbines with rotor diameters up to 150 meters. Each unit required roughly 730 cubic meters of concrete in the foundation, 140 tons of steel, fiberglass, and other materials. According to installation engineers, each turbine weighed nearly half a ton. The figure in context refers to a component. The full turbine is far heavier. Yet the output wasn't nearly as impressive as the size. First, lifespan. Mostly metal, running outdoors basically 24/7. A turbine lasts around 20 years. Pretty short for the investment. Performance also varies wildly with weather. Even on huge farms or mountaintops, output isn't consistent. Utilities must keep traditional thermal plants running in parallel to stabilize the grid. The irony, before anyone knows whether the wind project will truly work, companies clear forests or flatten mountaintops to install turbines, hardly protecting nature. Jeff admitted he was in a deeply awkward spot. He'd opposed fossil fuels from the start, but after seeing the reality of clean energy, he realized this wasn't a solution either. All the hype about everlasting batteries and EVs was blatant manufacturer deceit. Even projects like using elephant dung for biogas failed. The entire herd's waste wasn't enough to heat their own barn, let alone anything bigger. So what? About biofuels containing ethanol like E10 and E85? Here Jeff hit an even bigger problem. Ethanol plants had secrets. Most clean energy ethanol is produced from crops like corn, sugarcane, cassava, or wheat. But to run those plants at scale requires more than just biomass. Tied to nearby coal mines, these facilities effectively rely on fossil fuels to create what we call clean energy. Same story as EVs. Trace the supply chain, and so-called clean energy doesn't really cut coal or oil use. Gradually, scientists began peeling back the clean energy veneer. Richard York, a sociologist and environmental researcher at the University of Oregon, published work asking whether non-fossil energy actually displaces fossil fuels. His conclusion: nations don't really replace fossil fuels. So were the billions invested just wasted? Many scientists remain optimistic that with resources and time, they can overcome these hurdles. But scholars like York and anthropologist Nina Jablonski of Penn State don't think so. In their view, humanity's efforts, while commendable, don't help much, and in some cases done poorly, they make things worse. Why think that way? Why do many people see clean energy as a step backward in the fight to save our polluted planet? Ozzie Zehner, a scholar at UC Berkeley and author of Green Illusions, The Dirty Secrets of Clean Energy and the Future of Environmentalism, argues that the most dangerous thing about today's clean energy industry is the illusion embraced by the scientific community. According to him, alternative energies, wind, solar, non-fossil fuels, are a blatant lie. They neither protect the environment nor reduce harm. At the core, solar panels are built primarily from silicon to form photovoltaic cells because silicon is an effective semiconductor for converting light into electricity. Reports often say sand is the main input, but sand contains too many impurities. To optimize semiconductor quality, manufacturers use high-purity quartz instead. After mining, quartz is smelted in an electric arc furnace at up to 1,800 degrees. Together with coal. Obviously, maintaining such intense heat over long periods demands a lot of coal. The result is that from extraction to manufacturing, making solar panels produces CO2. Even though solar is branded as the symbol of clean energy, its production depends on fossil fuels and inflicts real environmental damage. Environmentalists criticized this, and in response, Sierra Club's executive director Michael Brune pledged not to use coal in making semiconductors, only to pivot to natural gas. That's no real change. Producers still rely on fossil fuels. The absurdity continues. At Ivanpah, a giant solar facility reduced about a ton of CO2 here and there, while building a natural gas plant with 4 times the capacity of a coal plant. Clean energy companies keep insisting their projects are effective. But look at Sierra Club's Beyond Coal charts and you'll see something odd. From 2010 to 2020, clean energy use seems to shoot up, precisely when the biggest expansion of natural gas in history occurred. In other words, many glowing promises were just outright lies. Globally, solar provides only about 0.1% of annual energy consumption. Meanwhile, solar panels and wind turbines require constant maintenance. As noted, wind turbines last almost 20 years, solar panels about 10. That means we're investing millions into hardware with low efficiency that soon becomes industrial waste. Look at Ivanpah in California. Thousands of mirrors around a $377 million solar thermal plant. It tells a sobering truth. At launch, people called it the world's largest solar plant, a game changer. But if you know the whole system needs hours of natural gas burning each morning just to start up, your view changes. To satisfy safety rules, the operator even applied for permits allowing acid rain, nitrogen oxide emissions, and CO2 offset credits for what they release. To hide these ugly truths, there's no shortage of massaged numbers. Public talks often claim Germany uses 35 to 50% wind and solar. But in reality, Germany remains Europe's biggest coal consumer, and renewables account for under 5%, the figure cited in the film's context. Elon Musk, when introducing Tesla's Gigafactory, said it would run largely on wind and solar. Yet everyone can see the factory is connected to the city grid, and the batteries in EVs, plus panels and turbines, all need rare earths from deep underground. During mining, about 90% of what's pulled up contains uranium, thorium, and low-level radioactive material. Disposal? Plants often turn it into slurry and spread it across desert tracks. Tesla uses a lot of aluminum, especially in the underbody and monocoque, because it's light, strong, and easy to fabricate, improving performance and range. But aluminum, takes 8 times more energy than steel to produce, and smelting it generates toxic emissions since it relies on burning carbon to electrolyze alumina into metal. After Tesla announced the Gigafactory, investors moved to open new coal mines. Even Apple once pledged 100% renewable energy. To its credit, it installed big solar fields near its North Carolina data centers, but conveniently didn't mention clearing a whole forest to do it. And Apple never disconnected from the grid. These are just 2 among hundreds of companies, misleading the public about running fully on wind and solar. Here's another dirty secret. Beyond polluting deserts with radioactive waste, corporations have mowed down thousands of century-old Joshua trees without remorse. Deserts aren't dead lands. They're ancient, unique ecosystems bursting with species. And now they're destroyed in the name of progress, traded for fields of broken panels and rusting turbines. Turns out what we call green energy, renewables, and industrial civilization is actually humanity's desperate measure to save itself on the edge of extinction. Instead of facing the reality that we're draining Earth's resources, we've painted a picture that doesn't exist. We should have started by addressing global population. Anthropologists say that once population hits certain thresholds, societies tip into crisis and collapse, like many past mass extinction scenarios. So why do banks, corporations, and environmental leaders fixate on the narrow solution of green tech? Is the motive profit, or something deeper? What else keeps the powerful clinging to the belief that clean energy will save humanity? In recent years, many energy companies have announced they burn only scrap wood or wood chips for biomass, instead of coal or gas. But this isn't a solution, because the true aim of green living is to reduce energy consumption, not find ways to produce more. Take this facility. Reports show it burns 400,000 tons of wood every year, plus natural gas to generate electricity. In some ways, the powers that be are closing their eyes and selling the public a fairy tale. That solar panels, wind turbines, and burning wood will save the environment. But they ignore a basic fact. Wood doesn't produce the high heat levels they need. To boost temperatures, they add all sorts of materials into the furnace, solid waste and shredded rubber from old tires. So burning wood doesn't reduce CO2. Instead, it emits soot and fine particulates that foul the air in towns next to schools, hospitals, and nursing homes. Seeing the problem clearly, students at the University of Michigan protested their utilities' decision to switch from coal to biomass to power the city. Even so, the whole US got swept up in the shift to wood-sourced fuels and industrial waste. From California to Massachusetts, utilities held press conferences praising biomass. They touted their accomplishments and even pushed Michigan to mandate 25% of the state's electricity come from renewables by 2025. It's not just America. Countries worldwide are moving toward biomass. The phrase wood chips sounds like scrap, but in reality, it's trees harvested from old-growth forests. That means Michigan is just the start. Like a storm, hundreds or thousands of biomass and biofuel plants will sprout across the US, leading to rampant deforestation. Corporations seem to ignore the fact that growing a tree to harvestable size takes decades. Yet in just a few hours, that timber will be burned to make clean energy. Strangely, some major environmental groups that once encouraged biomass, like the Sierra Club and 350.org, suddenly published reports opposing it, only to pivot back in support soon after. This inconsistency confused the public and raised questions. What are leaders really pursuing? Asked directly. Some dodged, some rambled, some claimed neutrality, and most absurdly, many said they didn't know. Only Vandana Shiva, an environmental leader, flatly rejected biomass as clean energy. To her, it's an illusion propped up by the monetary system. Anyone pushing it is chasing profit and huge investment flows. To verify this, Jeff dug through financial filings and found that billionaires love turning what remains of nature into returns. For example, Sierra Club's tax filings show $3 million from investor Jeremy Grantham, yet recipient names were blacked out. 350.org's Bill McKibben reportedly received $50,000 from Goldman Sachs. What exactly were they funding? No one could say, and clearly those investments weren't producing effective solutions. In SEC filings, Jeff found green funds, propelled by environmental groups with capital coming from some of the world's biggest polluters: Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and oil and gas giants like BP, Exxon, Chevron, Gazprom, and Enviva. It didn't stop there. Al Gore, behind the famous climate documentary, teamed up with David Blood to launch Generation Investment Management, which built a special portfolio and raised large amounts for biomass and biofuels. The issue: they partnered before an inconvenient truth was released. So was the film a smokescreen to reach bigger profits, or was there another plan? Ultimately, the picture came into focus. The environmental movement had become a pretext for supercorporations and billionaires to get rich. By partnering with businesses that mine and burn fossil fuels, they warped the original purpose of environmentalism into a vehicle for self-interest. In truth, there's no such thing as green living or clean energy in the way it's sold. This is a game controlled by those who hold power. Jeff ends the film with a sobering thought. Believing in infinite growth on a planet with finite resources is suicide. We must accept that humanity is steadily killing the Earth. Right now, immediately, we need to reclaim the environmental movement and build a new awareness instead of blindly trusting solar panels, wind turbines, non-fossil fuels, or EVs. Only then can humanity continue to live and develop on this planet. Planet of the Humans closes with Jeff Gibbs' unresolved questions more than with answers. Upon release, the film stirred fierce controversy. Some said Jeff was one-sided and misleading. Others said he sparked a necessary debate on an issue the world cares about. While Jeff Gibbs' effort to present thought-provoking information is undeniable, Planet of the Humans is, in part, colored by personal pessimism, rather than acknowledging scientific progress. With a topic this complex and contentious, clearly, we need more time, knowledge, and analysis from many angles to see the full picture. In the end, the film is just one slice, one viewpoint among many, contributing to global conversation about Earth's future. Like everyone living on this blue planet, I hope that in the not-too-distant future we'll see great strides in protecting the environment and advancing clean energy. That's the end of the video. Thank you for watching. For now, goodbye and see you next time.